Daily Devotion with Pastor Balla for July 26, 2020, from 2 Samuel chapter 4. David remembers his promise to Saul. You may remember a while ago, while Saul was still living, Saul asked David not to eliminate his family. That's what the typical new king would do, is get rid of the old king's family. But for the sake of Saul and the sake of Jonathan, whom David really appreciated, David agreed he would not destroy King Saul's family. Now let's pick up what happens in chapter 4. We may remember yesterday Abner, King Ishbosheth's great military commander, was killed. And so, verse 1, when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. It was interesting that Ishbosheth had a couple of captains who were on raiding parties, so to speak, and when they heard that Ishbosheth's courage failed, what did they do? They snuck up on Ishbosheth while he was sleeping, and they killed him. And then they took his head and they brought it to David, thinking that David would reward them for killing the king of Israel. Verse 9, and David answered, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversary, when one told me, 'Behold, Saul is dead,' and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not now reward his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth?" Verse 12, and David commanded his young men, and they killed him, and cut off their hands and feet, and hanged him beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. David kept his word, kept his promise. He wasn't going to kill out the sons of Saul. And at this point you might be thinking all hope is lost. But let me back up to verse 4 for a moment. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. So there still was a distant line of Saul left. David would keep his promise, and we'll hear later on what happens when David hears there's a son of Jonathan left. David is a man of his word. Even though it would have been convenient to wipe out all the line of Saul, David kept his word. He was also a man of God, and God's word is always kept. So being a man of God, he would also keep his word. As Christians, we live in a world where many people fail to keep their word, and sometimes people's words are really meaningless. But God's word is always kept. God always keeps his promises. So we need to continue to remind ourselves how God still loves and forgives us and provides a place for us in heaven above. And God does keep his word. Remember, God anointed David as a king after his own heart. So David also would keep his word to a dead king, Saul, and to a dead friend, Jonathan, to preserve their family, to keep it intact. David continues to keep his word. Join me again tomorrow as David gets anointed king of Israel. God's peace and many blessings. Thank you for watching, and please take an opportunity to share this video with others. If you have enjoyed these daily devotions, please consider making a donation to Peace Lutheran Church, 24024 West Main Street, Plainfield, Illinois 60544. Thank you again for watching.